Okay, I will call the Investment Advisory Committee to order. Please, roll call.
John Kennedy, present. Tony Badalamenti, present.
Okay, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes, the regular meeting from June 27th, 2024.
I'll second that.
Roll call? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And we will zip along to the portfolio update.
Let me know when you want to put some green
Okay. Do we want it on the screen?
Yep. And now we want
yep.
the portfolio, that to be accessible online to folks so they can read it.
So we're gonna lose Sabrina in a second, right?
No, you're
Well,
fine.
no, she can see it.
Yeah, you're gonna see, no, we'll lose your lovely face, we're gonna lose. Bye.
Okay, now
Okay.
Sam can use bench video.
Hi, Eileen.
Hi.
Okay,
All
Eileen,
right.
you're up, man.
Great, we got it.
Now you should be able to just click through it.
Okay, so perfect. Technology is great.
You have to go up over.
Oh.
You may have to go
Oh,
down there.
I have to go down. There we go.
Oh, there you go.
Ah,
There you go.
fabulous.
That's great.
All right. Well, thank you again.
Wonderful
It's
screen cat.
hard to-
Sure.
Are we all set streaming now, too?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
We're fine.
All right.
Okay.
So hard to believe we're already in September, in the latter part of 2024. And a lot has been happening here, particularly of recent. So when we look at the economic update, starting out with our FIGE outlook, and remember FIGE stands for the first letter of each of these components that we will touch on. First and foremost, of course, is the Fed funds rate. The Fed did meet in September, on September 18th, and they did lower that overnight rate by 50 basis points. So prior to this, we had the overnight rate in a range of 5.25% to 5.5%. So subtracting 50 basis points from that, the overnight rate is now in a range of 4.75% to 5%. And expectations as set forth by the Fed through their updated projections indicate that additional rate cuts are expected yet this year, and we'll talk further about additional rate cuts into 2025 as well. Now, what allowed the Fed to make these movements is kind of multifold. First of all, inflation. Inflation is still present. We do know that inflation, as we look at the inflation numbers, that is measuring the change in prices. It is not a measure of the cumulative effect of inflation, but that change in price from period to period, year to year, has dropped. And although it remains above the Fed target, it has been very stable of late. Additionally, the outlook for growth, economic growth in the U.S. has dropped as the consumer is continuing to feel the negative impact of those higher rates, particularly on credit cards and of course housing. And we've seen this additionally reflected in the consumer confidence numbers that just came out here recently. The employment picture is also, we think, primarily been the driver of the Fed being able to now move forward with cutting rates. And that's because we have seen the unemployment rate move up from its low of 3.4% to its current level of 4.2%. And we additionally have seen job growth basically very much so contract. Last read on the job growth was 114,000 new jobs created. That's barely enough to absorb the growth of the U.S. labor force. And in addition, there was a adjustment made to the historical job growth numbers over the past year, where the numbers that had previously been released have been refined, and that difference has been a reduction of a little over 800,000 jobs that were not actually created in over the past 12 months. So all of this leads into this now environment of where the bias is for lower interest rates, not only in the front end, but also a continued bias of lower interest rates, even in the intermediate term level. The next page here gives us an indication of really what the market is expecting will be additional rate cuts throughout the next 15 months. This chart is reflecting the expected cumulative impact of lower rates. So we start out with the Fed meets again in November, and then they also meet in December of this year. So when we think in terms of where can we expect the overnight rates to be just by the end of this year, as we can see from this chart, clearly more than 1% less than where they are today, even after the Fed has cut rates. So this impacts us predominantly when we think in terms of the impact on the liquid options that the county has their liquid monies invested in, say the Star Ohio account or
Right.
local bank,
Yep.
savings account. Star Ohio, of course, topped out around $5.50 earlier this year. This morning, it has now already dropped to 5.09%.
Right.
So the rate on these liquid accounts will move very quickly anytime that the Fed moves rates. And we don't think that Star Ohio has hit its bottom yet in this cycle.
And
John.
there's a greater than 50% chance
Yes.
that in come November, they're gonna drop it another 50 basis
Yes.
points, correct?
That is
Yeah.
correct, right? And so when we think in terms of if the data supports the Fed moving along this path, reducing rates to this effect, we could see those overnight rates drop below 4% by the end of this year. And then looking forward into 2025, those overnight rates could be below 3%. So clearly, that's a much different interest rate environment than
Yes.
what we had experienced, as inflation had, picked up speed and the Fed had moved those interest rates higher on that fastest pace.
I will interrupt you just to say that you predicted this
Thank you.
back in June. I just want to go on record saying that you had a crystal ball and you predicted that the Fed was going to make a move.
Thank you. We'll take it.
It's your fault.
Yes.
I don't wanna know where Eileen got that crystal ball.
I would like to know too. So, as we know, this is an election year, and of course, the Fed moving rates
Mhm.
prior to an election brings into question, is it politically driven, or is the Fed maintaining their independence as they have maintained, or said they have maintained throughout time? And so what we're looking at here is going back to 1971, the absolute change in that overnight rate Fed action during all years and then versus the election years. So when we look at the general election years,
right.
we can see that the Fed has moved rates just under 4%. Of course, since 1971, that was during times when we had some very, very different interest rate environments than what
Yeah.
we've even have had of late. But comparing it to during all years, where the Fed has, on all years, has moved rates on average by 3%, that difference, of course, this 50 basis point move that we recently had is within that tolerance range. So we would clearly feel comfortable saying that the Fed's movement here at the September 18th meeting was not politically driven. It was based off of the data that they were seeing on the economic side.
Could you make an argument that they waited too long to make a cut?
Yes, you could make an argument, particularly because hindsight is always 20/20.
Correct.
So I think, right, had the Fed known really the extent of the labor market changes,
They were waiting for that data to come in.
Yes.
And their, right, to make their argument, they were waiting for that.
yeah, so clearly, right.
Yep.
Had they known that, we think they would have
Right.
cut rates back in July and probably that 25 basis point, which is historically, as we looked back through those numbers of, how often does the Fed do a 25 basis point cut versus a 50 basis point cut? Hands down, 25 basis point change in interest rates has been their MO.
77% or something
Yes.
like that, or 77
Thank you.
times it happened, yeah.
Right. So inflation, we touched on the fact that inflation has moderated. What we're showing here is the consumer price index. This is year-over-year numbers on the top graph. As we can see, the consumer price index topped out at 9.1%. Back in the summer of 2022, it has since, of course, come down and now stands at 2.5%. When we look at really the level of the consumer price index over the past year, you know, it's been bouncing around between that 2.5% to 3% range. And this is really what the Fed was looking to see. Was inflation, you know, settling down? Was it not really, you know, reversing course and moving back up? So was the impact of those higher interest rates really being felt in the consumer price index? And so clearly, as we can see here, there was no sign that the inflation was reversing course. And that's also supported by looking at the Fed's preferred measure, which is the personal consumption expenditure measure on the bottom graph. The dotted orange line is the Fed's preferred target of 2% inflation. And very similar story. We can see that inflation has come down. Now the PCE measure did not rise as high as the consumer price index for two reasons. Number one, the PCE measure that the Fed looks at excludes the volatile food and energy components because food and energy prices don't necessarily react to changes in interest rates. They tend to be more volatile, driven based off of other factors. And so the Fed is really looking to see what is that kind of core inflation path, excluding those other items. Additionally, when we compare the consumer price index to the personal consumption expenditure index, the personal consumption expenditure index has a lesser weight on housing versus the consumer price index. The consumer price index has a higher weighting taking into consideration the change in prices of housing. And then on the flip side, though, the PCE measure puts a higher weight on things like medical costs, which, of course, as we all know, have also gone up significantly during this time period. But needless to say, the Fed had made it very clear they did not need to see that inflation measure hit 2% before they would reverse course. They just needed to see that the behavior of it was such that it was not reversing course and it was on its way, headed down and shown some progress towards 2%. Another key component, of course, is the growth of the U.S. economy. So this is that quarter-over-quarter growth, GDP, gross domestic product. As we can see, coming out of COVID, very high growth, and then growth stalled, somewhat picked back up. We've had some, uneven growth, and last quarter's growth was at 3%, which would be considered trend growth for the U.S. economy. But looking at the estimates going forward, the expectations are that growth will slow through the balance of 2024 and go into 2025 with growth below 2% levels. So clearly, those impact of higher interest rates, the impact of inflation, as we know, having a big impact on the consumer, and the consumer spending accounts for 2/3 of GDP. So while the consumer is feeling, very stretched and having more limited resources for spending, that will translate into lower growth in the U.S. economy.
Weren't there some averages that came out, not Bloomberg, but other estimates that indicated it was going to be around 2?
Yes, it varies.
I mean,
yeah.
you can, I saw something to that effect
Yeah.
anyway, 2, 2.1.
Yeah, the Philadelphia Fed, I believe, does a survey of, they have a group of economists as well, where they survey what their expectations are. Some of those folks, I believe, are in the Bloomberg, but it is
I
a
see.
different set,
Okay.
yes. The impact on interest rates, of course, has been, as we talked about, the short-term rate has now started to drop as the Fed has moved. But the longer-term rates, as we can see, looking at this graph where we're looking at the yield on the 2-year Treasury and the yield on the 5-year Treasury, the 2-year being the turquoise line and the 5-year being the orange line, we can see that those yields had actually started to drop prior to the Fed moving. So again, the market sets these rates and the market anticipates what will be the path of of inflation, the path of the jobs, the path of the economy, as well as what will be the Fed action that is anticipated to be made. And so, even though rates have dropped, when we look back historically, we are still at levels we have not seen since 2007. So clearly, you know, it still has been some time since we've had rates above 3%, which is where we are today. And we think that still presents an opportunity to lock
Right.
in rates to
Yep.
maintain those longer-term holdings
Right.
that we have in the investment portfolio.
Yep.
All right, any other questions, comments?
No, ma'am.
Nope.
This was changing before. Here we go. All right, so let's take a look at the county's investment portfolio. This is as of the end of August, $52 million in cash. Of course, we're at a point here where it's past collections, past settlement, so we would consider this more so the core cash position of the county. Securities portion, $173 million, plus total combined is $225,600,000 and some thousand dollars. So one of the things that we always talk about is what's that right balance between cash and investments. You know, and generally a good rule of thumb is 20% of the total in cash,
Yep.
80% in investment.
Mhm.
So that being said, you know, we can look at considering maybe reducing this cash balance maybe down to about 45 million, which would be 20% of the total. And again, this would serve to protect the county from what we believe will be a much lower interest rate environment on those cash
Right, right.
balances as well.
How often would we look at that numbers that you just said?
Mm-hmm.
Quarterly, half, semi-annual?
We generally try to look at it quarterly, and again, we always want to look at it when we're at a point where we don't have the cash distorted by the property tax
Mhm.
collection.
Correct.
Yeah, because sometimes that number can be, if we go into look at February, it's probably $100+ million or
Correct.
something, because property tax
Right,
dollars.
it's
are
not an
coming in.
accurate reflection.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah. So right, last quarter and then this quarter, we had more, I would say, clean numbers to look at.
Right.
Yes. Sure, good question. So as far as our weighted average maturity, we're at 2.47 years on the securities portfolio. We think it would be prudent to continue to try to move that up to about 2.5 years, maybe 2.55 years. And of course, the way that we would do that is by continuing to build up that longer term, those longer term holdings. So when we look at and I know this doesn't show up well on the screen, but on the printouts, if we look at the percentage of the investments we have maturing in the 3 to 4, 4 to 5, and 5 to 10 year period,
Mhm.
we're at 39%. And so our objective, as we've talked, has been to get that up to about 42%. And that will help to push that weighted average maturity out beyond 2.5 years slightly. Now, of course, we do that through as the reinvestments, as we have maturities next quarter, we have 12.6 million of funds coming due. Now granted, we probably will not put all of that out beyond 3 years, because we also, in view of this, current path of interest rates that we are in on the short term, we want to also build up a little bit more our 2 to 3 year area bucket as well.
Right.
And then what that will do is allow us to be able to bridge that gap of during this interest rate cycle.
Right.
And lowering the percent that we have in the 0 to 1 year to work to get that down to about 17% from our previous target was 20%.
Right, basically moving from the longer term
Yes,
to the short term or
intermediate term.
intermediate term.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
the new reality.
Yes, yes. The yield on the portfolio is 3.32%. That's up from the previous quarter.
Yep.
And where we at 3.19%. John and I talked about, of the 22% of the funds that we have maturing inside of a year, as we're reinvesting those funds, will we be reinvesting those at rates higher? That will add to the portfolio yield. And the answer to that, we believe, is yes. And the reason being because many of the securities that now are maturing within the 0 to 1 year were securities that were purchased before interest rates had risen.
Right.
So that's when interest rates were much lower. So the yield on those securities on average is right below 3%. So if we're reinvesting
Yeah.
at 3.5 to 4, it will still be accretive to the yield and the interest income for the county.
Great.
Oops, wrong button. Okay, our purchases that we made here in the last quarter, 13.5 million. As we can see, the weighted average yield on those securities was 4.12%. We can also see that the security we purchased in August, that rate was lower than the securities that were purchased earlier in the
Mhm.
quarter. And the 4.12% average yield, we compare that to last quarter's purchases. Last quarter's purchases were at 4.48%. So we can see again, as the market had anticipated an environment of lower rates and had lowered those longer term rates, that did impact our reinvestment as well, but still at a much higher level than the maturities. So this all becomes very important when we think in terms of what will be the amount of income that the county will receive on a go-forward basis. So we've updated this chart based on the securities that are in the portfolio as of the 24th. This does not assume any reinvestment, does not include any income on the cash as well. But as we can see, we look at the 25, 26, 27, 25, we know even without reinvestment, the county will receive just under $5 million of interest income. 26, a little over $5 million, and John pointed out to me, we added the $6 million top bar.
We didn't have that before.
No, we didn't have
So
that
that's-
before.
We kinda like that.
Yep.
Yes.
Right, we
So that's
do.
gonna be our goal, we're gonna be reaching
Yeah.
towards, to try to get
Yep.
one of those numbers closer to 6.
We get 7.
Call me when you get started on 7.
And then, of course, 27, still very strong income generation from the portfolio. And then as we have less, of course, securities maturing in 28, 29, that income does fall off. But as we're reinvesting longer term, those numbers will grow as well.
Of course.
Yes.
Yeah.
So providing that sustainability through this interest rate cycle. The next page, oops, I gotta change the page. Is just given that historical perspective, going back, of course, to 2006, which was a time period when interest rates were over 5%. But again, lesser dollars invested in the portfolio. But as we can see now, on a go-forward basis, based on just some simple math of the current portfolio times the current weighted average yield, portfolio on an annualized basis could earn $5.7 million of interest income.
Wow.
And so we want to try to make as much of that as possible,
Yes.
repeatable year after year.
Yes. It's great.
And then the last component is the portfolio holdings as of the end of August. This, of course, is the inventory of cash and securities that the county does own. And we can see, of course, those at the yield at cost, those that have the lower yields. If we look at the settlement date column, which is the third column from the left, those were purchased in 2020, 2021. So those will be rolling off. Okay, any other questions, comments?
Oh, man.
No, it appears that our portfolio is performing well.
Yes.
Thank you.
On the right track.
And we need a motion, right, to accept the portfolio review?
I'll make a motion to accept the portfolio review.
I'll second that.
Roll call? Yes?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Other business, the Grow Link.
GrowLink. So I have a couple things. It's the last two sheets listed in the materials I provided everybody with. We've had a total of one new loan for a homeowner for $15,000. Obviously, that's That's a bit disappointing since our last meeting, and we had talked, and you guys will recall, that I had, I was going to make an effort to reach out to Hometown and inquire with them about, you know, what they were doing to promote these loans. So I did meet with them. I met with the actual folks on the ground who make these loans. They did have some turnover over there. They have some new people. I educated, informed them, provided them with the GrowLink brochure. And this was almost like within 2 weeks after our last meeting, I met with them. And even at that time, the feedback I got from them was that people are in a holding pattern. Because with the uncertainty with the election and with what the Fed was going to do or not do, people were waiting for cash to become more accessible and cheaper. And I have been out to all 18 township trustee meetings over the last 6 months, all of them. I've been to all city councils meetings throughout the county. And the feedback I get when because I talk about our low interest loan program, 1 to 3% below market for homeowners, for small farms, and for our businesses, small businesses. The feedback I get is, John, we just want to go into hold pattern right now because we're still uncertain about the election, and we're still waiting to see what the Fed does. Well, now with the 50 basis point drop in interest, I do believe, and I've been told by some folks who have been waiting, that come first quarter of 2025, they're going to pull the trigger and take out one of these loans. And you know, we have been getting bites at the apple, but people are hesitating still, and that's what they're telling me, that they're just waiting post-November into early 2025 before they start taking a look again at this. But I'm going to keep up the conversation and communication with our banks to make sure that, you know, I'm checking in and that this is being promoted and amplified on the ground there with the banks. And I'm going to continue the conversation with every meeting, public meeting that I attend. I'm promoting the hell out of our GrowLink program because I think come 2025, this is going to be a game changer for some of our, especially our small businesses.
Mhm.
I want to see our small businesses take advantage of this in the coming year. Go ahead, Tony.
Last meeting, we increased by $1 million.
We did.
So our total,
We're close to
seeking to
we're
3 million?
3 million total.
Total,
Um,
and we're a
we're-
little over 2 million.
Right. So that's where we are. Just going to continue the promoting the heck out of it wherever and whenever I possibly can and making it available. Again, I think we're going to see some people start biting at the apple come 2025.
Excellent. All right, thank you, John. Len, is there anything else you can think of? John, is there anything? Seek a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
Second, roll call?
Aye.
So,
Yeah.
Sabrina,
Sabrina.
Hang on 1 second.
she can't see us?
Hang on 1 second.
We can hear you now.
There you go.
We can hear
Yes.
you.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh. No, sorry. I had a call that snuck in and blocked my video for you guys, so I apologize for that. And then, are we dismissed now?
We are dismissed. We just spoke, the last thing we said was that we did raise it by $1 million, so we're gonna be at 3 million. John believes it's gonna be first quarter of 25 is when he believes that will start taking off, that people may wanna utilize that service that we have. And that was it. Okay, but we did adjourn. So do you have anything else you'd like to say?
All right, thank you.
Okay,
Thank you,
All right,
Sabrina.
all right. Have a great, we'll see
I
you.
was having a hard time hearing, and now my volume just like kicked in, so.
Okay, all right.
Technology, gotta love it. So recap that again, Tony, I was just having, so when I got bumped off, we were going over the loans that we have set money aside and we had increased. But then I thought I heard you say that since the last meeting, there's only been one additional
Correct.
loan that has been done.
15,000 for a home loan.
How much?
15,000, a homeowner. Yep,
So
So
they,
you're thinking we'll see more
We-
increase?
yep. All the feedback I'm getting at all the trustee meetings, at all the city council meetings, and from just in general is, John, we're waiting, we're interested, but we're going to wait till the beginning of the new year
Yeah.
to do this because we're uncertain about the election and we were uncertain about the Fed and the rates.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
you know, if you can get a 1 to 3% below market, why not wait until the market moves, right? And
Yeah.
the market has moved,
Yeah.
but they're probably going to drop another 50 basis points. So why not
Yeah.
wait a few more months?
Exactly. Okay, well, thank you very much. Bye, Eileen.
bye Sabrina.
Bye, Sabrina.
Bye, Tony.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, John.
Well, thank you very much.